One-party rule has resulted in censorship, excessive use of force, and it can result in horrible economic consequences. The Democrats have ruled for the past 2 years, and we have an economic problem. The GOP wants to balance things out. They want your vote. They have a plan, and that is next. Hey, welcome back to the Farah Show, where we talk about culture, politics, and leadership in light of freedom principles. Great to have you. Hey, today we look at the economic plan that the Republicans propose in their commitment to America. First, I just want to give you a quick note on our broadcast. We're not only watched and listened to in every state in the United States, but we just found out in every major country also. So that's kind of exciting for us. Today, we just give a shout out to our listeners in Canada, and they are from everywhere in Canada: Alberta, British Columbia, Manitoba, New Brunswick, Newfoundland, Nova Scotia, Ontario, Prince Edward Island, Quebec, and Saskatchewan. Thank you. Hey, please subscribe and share. So back to today's topic. In 1994, Republican Congressman Newt Gingrich proposed a contract with America. It was during Democrat President Clinton's tenure as president. On the strength of that plan, the Republicans swept to a majority in the House for the first time since 1953. They also won the Senate. It was such a political earthquake that the Democrat president said, "The era of big government is over." The most ambitious goal with this contract with America was to propose an amendment to the Constitution, and the amendment would require the federal government to have a balanced budget. It was called the Fiscal Responsibility Act. Imagine that. This almost happened. Now, you need a 2/3 vote in both the House and the Senate to amend the U.S. Constitution, unless you're going to do it through all the states. The House, which had this phenomenal majority, and with the help of a bunch of Democrats, made it. They got to that threshold. They were about 68%. The Senate, amazingly, almost got there. They got 65 of the 66 votes that they needed. Just one liberal voted against a balanced budget, and that was a Republican, Senator Mark Hatfield from Oregon. That close to having an amendment to the Constitution that would have protected this wonderful country from excessive and reckless spending. Everything would have had to be paid for. Can you imagine that? Just like you have to do at home. And you would only be able to get, for the most part, common sense things passed. The Federal Reserve would have been forced into a limited role. But that's just wishful thinking because it didn't happen. Just by one vote. I mean, that's a double shucks. Now, there were other proposals, though, from that era that made it all the way through. For example, you could have a faith-based organization help welfare recipients, and that would help them move towards self-sufficiency. Supporters of the contract with America didn't get everything that they wanted, but they did make a pretty honest effort to fulfill their agreement. They put forward all the initiatives. There were those who were against them, and they were able to stop some of them, but they put forward every initiative they promised. So Newt Gingrich was just asked to comment on the new commitment to America. And he said that the commitment to America provides an even more detailed, substantial proposals and policies than his 1994 contract with America did. Now, part of the reason for that is that in 1994, the House was controlled by the Democrats for the entire previous 4 decades. So the Republicans just didn't really know how to be a majority party. In fact, the likes of Rush Limbaugh would complain, and in his case to a national audience of 22 million people, that House Republicans were just too gentlemanly. They were ineffective in their use of their power. Yet, even so, they did get a chunk of the agenda across the finish line. And an objective look back shows that the economy improved and some programs became more efficient, at least temporarily. So here we are. For the first time in 28 years, the Republican House of Republicans has come up with a public plan, and it's a pretty positive agenda. They provide real proposals. Behind their executive summary is a sophisticated set of governing policies, things that you can review and look at for yourself. And these were put together over the last year and a half by 7 working groups. Now, they say they developed the plan from the perspective of what's good for the everyday American. And when you look at it, it seems like that's the case. The Commitment to America is a document that not only reflects their priorities, but it's signed by the House Republicans. So it's about as close as you can get to a voluntary structure of open accountability. In essence, the House Republicans are saying that they're unified in their commitment to you. They have laid it all out for all to see. And they have 4 commitments. 1 is an economy that is strong. Number 2 is a nation that's safe. Number 3 is a future that's built on freedom. And number 4 is a government that's accountable. It kind of all sounds pretty good. Today, we tackle the first one, an economy that is strong. To pull off an economy that's strong, the House Republicans propose an all-out fight against inflation, and as a result, to lower the cost of living, make America energy independent and strengthen the supply chain, and kind of reduce our reliance on China. It's actually a fairly well-supported set of policies that are mainstream economic theory. So let's look at fighting inflation and the drive to a lower cost of living. Now, you've got basically 3 levers of power that the federal government can utilize to impact this goal. Number 1 is currency or monetary policy. Number 2 is regulation or regulatory policy. And then number 3 is taxes and spending or what they call fiscal policy. Now, you know it's bad when you pay more for things and your pay raise does not keep up with the cost of things. So this goal to fight inflation seems like a good idea if there's a way to do it. How do you pull that off? Well, they break this down into 2 categories of proposals. First, curb wasteful government spending, which is part of the fiscal policy. I mean, heck, that'd be a good idea even if you didn't have any economic benefits. But it does have economic benefits. The real source of inflation is when governments expand. They expand beyond the tax revenues that they receive. So they have to print more money to cover the lopsided growth of government. Now, when I say lopsided growth, I say that because government spending is growing at a faster rate than production. And that contributes to shortages and it hurts you. So you pay more for groceries, gas, cars, and utilities because of the increased national debt and the reckless increased government spending. And this is just a fact. Increase the supply of money to chase too few goods and you've got inflation. Now, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the change in wages from 2017 to 2020 was favorable to the worker. The worker came out ahead. In other words, wage earners enjoyed increases in pay by as much as 6% more than the increase in the cost of things. So the delta was a 6% benefit. So the wage earner across all platforms came out ahead. Under Biden, that has reversed. Wages have gone up, but not near as fast as the cost of stuff that you want to buy and you need to buy. So the wage earner has lost ground. Some have estimated that's as much as $7,000 per year for the average wage earner. That's a lot. Now, the previous administration was not perfect. They printed too much money, too. But even with those mistakes, they initiated policies with tax reform and reduced regulations early on that encouraged people to make stuff. And when the private sector produces more goods than people need, inflation remains low, all things being equal. The U.S. economy can produce so many goods and so many varieties of business can do well that the competition keeps the prices reasonable. And that's why inflation was only 1.5%, while wages increased between 4 and 8% in the previous administration. What happened under Biden? Well, he did the opposite. He increased government spending by $9 trillion in less than 2 years. It's an unimaginable amount of money sloshing around that is not sourced in producing goods or services. And he discouraged certain businesses from growing, and he discouraged new businesses in certain industries that he just doesn't like from getting launched in the first place. So what's the result of that kind of government behavior and intrusion? Inflation has experienced a 550% increase under the Biden administration and the liberal House Democrats' legislative agenda. Just look at the graph. Inflation's hovering around 2%, well under control from 2017 all the way through 2020. Inflation was 1.5% in November 2020. It's now 8.3%. That's a 5.5x increase. In fact, food prices are up over 13.5%. Gas is up 25.6%. Electricity is up 19.8%. Transportation is up 13.5%. That's all really bad for you. It doesn't help your personal net worth. And the reality is the Democrats voted in a slew of legislation that increases the size and the bloat of federal government. And if they remain in power, they have promised to put in place more policies that would make it much worse. So what the House Republicans are proposing is to create an environment where monetary policy can have a chance. And I'm not a fan of the fiat money system. It just gives too much power to way too few people to control way too much. But that is what we have. And if the government simply would just be less reckless, just quit spending so much, the 32.5 million small businesses, all that entrepreneurial power, could play a longer game. And this would benefit them and the economy at large. The power of the U.S. economy is impressive in spite of our government bloat. When businesses have a stable environment to create more goods, more new businesses will enter the market, causing prices to stabilize, and the cost of living will decrease. So, what the House Republicans are encouraging here is to take two of the three key levers of state power, fiscal and monetary policy, and subordinate it to the benefit of the people. They use everyday language. Fight inflation, and lower the cost of living. To pull that off, keep the government from increasing their already monstrous size. Oh, and one more thing under the banner of fight inflation and lower the cost of living. The Republicans propose initiatives that will increase your take-home pay. Now, that's kind of an interesting approach. They're not saying that they will increase your gross pay, and that's honest. They can't really force an employer to pay you more. So how can they increase your net pay? Well, this touches fiscal policy, taxes. Fewer taxes being withheld from your paycheck will increase your net pay. And one of their policy initiatives out the gate is to put a crimp on the extra 87,000 IRS agents that the Democrats just put in motion. The Democrats just passed this law that's horrible in some ways. In some ways, maybe it's okay, but it's just got so much extra bloat to it. And in this horrible law, one of the things that's the most horrible is to increase taxes by increasing tax enforcement by adding more armed IRS agents than ever before. So the Republicans think this is just a bad idea, and they don't want to unleash unelected people with law enforcement power to come into your home and harass and bludgeon you for more tax dollars. Now, the well-off have tax accountants and tax attorneys. And this might be frustrating for you, but some of these people used to work for the IRS. They're expensive, they're aggressive, and they are not afraid of the IRS. The IRS could go after the well-off, but they would first have to find something out of place. And the tax code is so complex, they probably don't know the code as well as the tax accountant and the tax attorney working for that well-off guy. Plus, many tax professionals are scrappy litigators, and they believe in what they've determined. They fight tooth and nail to argue that the way they interpreted the IRS code and the way they calculated the return was done right the first time. So it's just not an easy hill to climb for the IRS. The IRS actually loses most of those cases. And they lose almost all of those cases where that well-off guy instructed his tax attorney to do things on the up and up. As a result, the IRS does not see the economic benefit to wrestling with the well-off as much as you might think, and certainly not as much as the Democrats have advertised. It's just easier for them to go after people who do not use tax professionals. They go after the person who will just cough up more money just to be done with the intimidation and the hassle. And what Republicans are saying is that they're on the side of the hardworking Americans who do not have the resources to hire a tax team. They're saying there's just a much better, much freer way to live, a much better approach. They oppose more IRS agents, and you can go back in time for 200 years and find that whenever the government decreases taxes, it increases disposable income, and it enables businesses to grow and hire more people. If the government was forced to just quit planning on raising taxes and just held them steady, it would provide businesses with the confidence to invest more in their businesses. So Republicans are promising to put the kibosh on any more taxes. If businesses gain more traction from that, that will increase the supply of goods and services. When more goods get produced and more services are available, that creates ample competition to lower prices for the consumer. Now, regulatory policy is the third lever of power, and Republicans believe that government should have limited regulatory goals. It certainly should not use regulation to force you into a system of political thought. Regulations should be limited to primarily safety issues. Regulations should not limit innovation. Regulations should not be obtuse. There should be a clear and simple way to access an appeal process. Regulations should increase transparency both for the government and for the consumer. Overzealous regulation and regulators, they just slow down growth. And they undermine the ability of business to get things done. And it puts way too much power in the hands of unelected officials. Now, in the Trump administration, they reduced regulations quite dramatically. And that did stabilize businesses. It gave them a reasonable way to plan and to reduce the risk of increasing investment. Under Biden, increased regulations primarily hurts small companies. Big companies can afford to maneuver around more regulations. In fact, for the big guy, regulations create a barrier to entry. Basically, it makes it harder for a smaller business to compete. And this causes supply of goods to decrease and for the price of those goods to increase. So the Republicans' policies are aimed at making it better for small businesses who disproportionately spend too much on unnecessary regulations. To pull this off, they propose a well-understood due process to provide that small business with an ability to appeal an arbitrary regulatory ruling. Makes sense to me. They also propose that there's an objective, evidence-based approach to coherent and common sense regulations. Everyone wants basic safety and solid engineering, of course. But what's different with this set of proposals, with this commitment to America, Republicans have come out and said they have a desire for a collaborative learning approach. Some of these things are complicated, and they're asking the small business owner and the general public to weigh in and give voice to a smarter and better regulatory policy, one where business and regulators cooperate together. They're taking a more humble approach. They're asking for the people in the field who are actually impacted by regulation to speak into the policy. That's a good way to keep the government of the people, by the people, and for the people. Good stuff. Now, the next area to build an economy that's strong is to make America energy independent and to reduce gas prices. They propose a return to pro-growth and pro-energy production policies. The U.S. has the ability to produce more oil and gas than any other country in the world. But we also use more than anyone else does, too. Now, under the previous administration, the U.S. was number one and on its way to producing so much that it would be a net exporter. Now, had that been the case, it would have been able to step in now for the benefit of Europe in the midst of the Russian disruption due to the Ukrainian-Russian war. You know, just a few years ago, Germany was warned of their energy risk by the previous president in a UN speech. The German delegation snickered, kind of mocked Trump. Well, I don't know if they're mocking him now. They were warned. If Biden had just left the oil and gas industry alone, the U.S. would right now be able to neuter Russia. But Biden did the opposite. Oil and gas companies were and are scolded and threatened by the Biden administration. They don't understand supply and demand. Under the Biden administration, the places where oil and gas companies can expand that the federal government has control over, all that came to a screeching halt. These land leases were canceled. In fact, Trump and even Obama approved 10 times as many leases during this same period in their presidencies. That's crazy. Gas prices shot up, of course, to record levels. In addition, electricity prices are up 20% since Biden took office. These were unforced errors. Biden just went on a rampage, egged on by his radical left advisors that hate the oil and gas industry. Regular retail gas was $2 in July of 2020. It was $4.62 July 2022. But gas prices would be much higher if Biden didn't drain the stockpile of petroleum maintained by the U.S. Department of Energy. The U.S. has capacity for 714 million barrels of oil in our Strategic Petroleum Reserve, the largest capacity in the world. This is oil stored in the tanks underground in Texas and Louisiana. The previous administration had it nearly full, over 638 million barrels of oil on Election Day 2020. The Strategic Petroleum Reserve is not supposed to be touched unless there's a national emergency or war. Biden has flooded the market, tapping over 200 million barrels of oil from the reserves to artificially drive gas prices down. I mean, he took 28 million barrels just in the last 30 days. The Strategic Petroleum Reserve is now below 1984 levels. This is supposed to be a muscular reserve. It's supposed to show the world that we can withstand a war and some national disasters at the same time. Strategic petroleum reserves were stable, above 638 million barrels from late 2017 and until Biden took office. Then after he took office, bam, the petroleum reserves shrink. And then there's a free fall this year. An astounding 40.5% drop in the Strategic Petroleum Reserves from January 1 to September 23rd, 2022. We just have 422 million barrels left, and that's shrinking. That's irresponsible. He has robbed our Strategic Petroleum Reserves for political purposes, manipulated by the market, and made the U.S. vulnerable. Now, the Republicans can't do anything to slow this reckless policy down from the executive branch unless they win sizable majorities. Regardless, what they can do is propose reliable, cleaner, American-made energy, and that is their commitment. How? You streamline the permitting process on the federal land leases. These are run by bureaucrats, and they tie things up for years. Kill that. Create a streamlined permitting process. Republicans propose policies that will return to a pro-America energy independence. The innovative, smaller oil and gas companies actually have cleaner and more efficient technology in some cases, but they're pushed out under Biden's heavily regulated approach. And the small guy needs stability to make the risky and heavy investment. So Republicans propose to reduce our reliance on foreign countries. And this will prevent the rolling blackouts that you see in California. This will lower the cost of gas and utilities. The final area related to making the economy strong is improving the supply chain. Republicans see a link between the supply chain issues and too much reliance upon China. In reality, the government doesn't have that great of a record at improving supply chain issues. Companies can optimize their company-owned inventory and improve their distribution network. For example, Costco bought their own cargo ships, their own freightliners. But government really isn't that good at doing more than protecting the safety of the free flow of goods. The real problem is political instability. In other words, federal government just don't interfere. Republicans are proposing to remove federally imposed barriers. For example, reduce the legal age to drive a truck. I mean, we send our young adults to war. If that same guy can pass the safety test to drive a truck at 18, why not? They propose waiving other regulations that just don't make any sense. Republicans commit to expand U.S. manufacturing and enhance America's economic competitiveness by getting the federal government out of the way. They also have plans to make the U.S. less vulnerable to hackers, so your personal data is more secure. At the end of the day, they propose introducing proposals and policies that will make the supply chain secure and move freely. So there you have it. One of the four commitments, an American economy that is strong. And to pull this off, a few pretty reasonable proposals that would fight inflation, lower the cost of living, make America energy independent, reduce gas prices, strengthen the supply chain, and reduce dependence on China. If you believe they're sincere, the Republicans' first commitment by itself would probably improve our lives. It would be a significant improvement over what we're experiencing now. An economy where the entrepreneur is celebrated and where people are free to innovate produces a strong economy, and that's beneficial for everyone. A centrally controlled economy only benefits those in lucky industries and those in positions of power or those in big companies. The 32.5 million small businesses need a strong and free economy to do well. Yet the Democrats say if they win in November, they have a vision too. And theirs is not so good. It's to expand the government even more. They would spend more and cause even more inflation. Their vision is to centralize things, control more, and to increase regulations further. This would make it even harder for small businesses to survive and certainly thrive. So there's two visions for the economy. One that the Republicans wrap under their commitment to America. It gets government out of the way and makes the economy stronger for everyone. The other vision, announced by Democrats, makes inflation worse, and it could thrust the U.S. into a severe recession. Even if the Republicans don't get everything done, and even if they only provide a check against the Democrats' current one-party rule, it'd be better for the economy than what we've got now. If you care about your country and you love freedom, whether you're a Democrat, Independent, or Republican, there's really just one responsible way to vote this fall. The USA will do better with a vote in support of the commitment to America. God bless you. To your freedom.
Hi, I'm David Farah. Thank you for listening to my dad's podcast, The Barry Farah Show, Culture Shift. Click subscribe now to be sure you don't miss an episode. Share this podcast with your friends on social media and give The Barry Farah Show your 5-star rating. See you next time.